Welcome to Story Strategy. This is episode, of course, my phone rings the second we start. Sorry.
I thought we just got some theme music. I was impressed.
That's my ringer. Anyway, here we are. 10 tips to make your story shine and save your editor's sanity. Hey, Dawn.
Hey.
Sorry about that.
Wow, she's adding theme music now. That's awesome.
I have gotten super high tech in this past week. Yeah.
Very, very high tech. Very impressive.
But that's just the kind of luck that I have right now.
Just how things are going. So how are you?
Well, I'm a person who always does all the things. And this week has forced me to realize that sometimes you can't do all the things. I guess I have a pinched nerve in my cervical spine. And it basically has made my right arm useless and very painful. So I feel like I'm carrying bags of water inside my arm all the time. Like it just aches and doesn't work. I keep dropping things. It's fun. So I guess that leads into sort of a funny story if you find total incapacitation amusing. My kids and I have been here on our own because we're getting ready to move. And my husband has already gone across the country. He's actually back now, so he's here to take care of me. But my kids have gotten used to me laying on the floor as if they're not sure where I am, I'm laying on the floor in the living room. So now they just come and they'll lay down next to me. And that's how we chat. We stare at the ceiling and talk to each other. And the little one has started bringing the iPad and he'll pop it up in front of my face. And we play all those silly pizza and cupcake making games. Mm-hmm. So we make pizzas together.
It's family bonding. Wherever it happens, it happens.
Okay, this is how mom spends time with us now. So
you're adjusting and adapting to your new situation. That's
I do not want to adapt or adjust to this situation, man. I have a new respect for people who live with chronic pain because it's no joke. This is absolutely unlivable. So I hope a couple more days, maybe tomorrow, it'll all be fine.
Yeah, we're going to cross our fingers for that.
Yeah, I mean, I have been talking to the doctor. I've seen the chiropractor. I see the orthopod on Tuesday. So hopefully there's relief in sight and we can finish moving without me dying.
That is a good goal. Any goal that you end without me dying, that is a good goal.
Yeah, that's usually most of my goals. I think I can put that on the end of. Can't we all?
Yes.
But that explains my location change here today. I'm holed up in the guest bedroom.
Well, it's a very cute pink pillow. I love the pink. It's very nice.
Thank you. All right. Well, enough of that. That's not fun. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about 10 tips to make your story shine and to save your editor's sanity.
Yay.
That is, things that make your editor bang their head on their desk and consider a career change. These are the things.
No, Dawn. These are things that all writers stumble into sometimes because they're easy. They're sort of story crutches, and they're things that you don't want to use because when you really start to hone your craft, there are better ways to do the things that these things can do, right?
Yes, they are. And we want to throw a little disclaimer out there. These are patterns we see across multiple manuscripts. We're not talking about any particular client. We're not talking about any particular bestseller. These are things that doing this for as long as we have, you see the pattern and you see, exactly what's happening and you want to stop it. So that's why we're putting this out there so you can take care of this before you send it to an editor.
Right. Hopefully you can start to see these things in your own work, because if you can knock this stuff out on your own, then your editor is free to focus on the really fine tuning, making your story sing. If you don't want your editor to spend all their time focused on kind of these things will become obvious the more time you spend writing and working in your manuscript. And so you don't want your editor to spend their time working on these kind of big, obvious things. You want them to really point out the stuff that you couldn't have found on your own.
Right. And hopefully having these kind of front and center will give, especially brand new writers, it will give you a place to, after you get that first draft out and it just is what it is, then when you go back and look at it, then you have a place to think, okay, this is what I need to smooth out and this is what I need to smooth out before I send this out into the world.
Yeah, and I would even say you can make a checklist from these, and as you're reading through your first draft, see, am I doing these things? Is there a spot in here where I know I do this? So I can use our little banner function to pop these up as we talk about them if you want.
Well, and I might be able to make a checklist and stick it in our files on the Evident Ink page.
That's a good idea.
Let me see if I can do that. We should have thought of that before we did that.
Oh, whatever.
Okay, so we came up with cute little clever titles to entertain ourselves while we were coming up with this.
Dawn did most of that because I've been like all week.
So our first one is Holy Backstory Batman.
Oh, I wanted it to pop up as you said it, but I didn't hit the button at the right time. There it is.
So I'll talk about this one just a little bit. We being the reader, do not need to know everything about your character in the first 5 pages.
Oh, but it's really important. You do. You have to know all that stuff, Dawn, to understand what's going to happen a little later. I need you to know everything, especially because some really bad stuff happened earlier. Like that, if you don't know about, you won't understand why she's doing stuff. So that's why I need to tell you all that stuff, right?
So no,
what?
No, that is incorrect. Because the reader wants to have questions, and there has to be a reason why I want to keep reading. And you don't want to dump everything in the beginning. Let us get to know each other. Consider it a blind date.
Yes, because your reader doesn't care about this person that you've just introduced them to yet. And so all that important stuff they need to know, they don't want to know that yet.
Yes. And I have this thing that happens to me in real life in that I have been told I have a friendly face and I like to smile at people. And so something about that invites them to tell me their entire life story, like in the line at the grocery store.
Yeah.
And so you don't want that to happen in the first chapter of your book. You don't want me, I go in to pick up bread and I get back in the car and I look at my husband and I'm like, so the woman behind me is divorced and has 3 kids, but only 2 of them were actually the husband that she divorced. One of them was the guy that she was sleeping with on the side.
But you really need to know that he worked for a bank. And
yes. And that's the important part. So one of the comments my clients see a lot on the developmental side of things, whenever I'm looking at this backstory, is I will put the comment of, does the reader need to know this right now to understand or enjoy what's going on in the story?
Right.
And so that's a question to ask yourself when you're looking at this backstory. The other thing, which we will get into a little bit later, is what is that doing to your pacing?
Yes.
And we've got a specific section about that here in a minute.
Yeah, I do like that blind date analogy, though, because you really should think of it like you've just sat down at a table with your reader and you are going to tell them this awesome story and you want them to be like, oh, what else? What next? Mm-hmm. So you got to keep it moving and make it as interesting as possible. And while that backstory seems super interesting to you because you already know the whole story, they're just getting little pieces. So you want to keep them intrigued, little teases, right? And make sure they have questions because otherwise you're doing all the talking.
Yes.
And that's not a good date.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. What's our next one? Character soup.
Yes. Character soup, or who are these people and why do I care?
Right. So have you ever started a book and it's like, I'm Susan and my best friend Janice and I were out at a bar and then Tommy and Joe came, but across the bar, Max was waving wildly and Max was with John and John and Max are both soccer players. But that's not important right now because Toby, who, what? And then the reader's like, what am I supposed to pay attention to? Like, there's so much going on. I don't know who I care about here.
Right. And readers won't remember all of that.
Yeah.
There's new authors especially tend to want to introduce the entire cast at the beginning of, this story is about 5 friends who live in an apartment in New York. And you need to know that Monica is the neat freak and Joey is the womanizer and Chandler's the funny one. I don't need to know all that in the beginning.
Right. And let us see that through the action.
Yes.
So we will figure that stuff out ourselves. You don't have to tell us.
Right. And I kind of relate it to a friend of mine is one of 12 children.
Oh my gosh.
And I went to her baby shower and she was introducing me to her brothers and sisters by number. I'm not kidding. She was like, "This is Elizabeth. She's number 4." And then like this guy came walking through and she's like, "Oh, that's James. He's married to Savannah, who's number 6." And I'm like, "Is there going to be a quiz later? Am I going to have to like fill out a paper that proves I remember everybody's name and who they're..."
Did you stop her and say, "Do I need to know all of this right now?"
Well, I didn't, but I was thinking like, please don't anybody ask me your name, your number, who you're married to.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And so you've got to introduce the characters gradually and introduce them without dumping everything the POV character knows about them at my feet.
Right. Or I also suggest, I've run across a couple examples where we fall into patterns. We all have crutches as writers, things that are comfortable, things that we do without thinking about it. My characters nod and shake their heads all the time. They also, well, we'll get to this one later. They say something all the time that Dawn hates. But
we're saving that one.
Yes. I noticed it got on your list and I was like, oh, that's for me. And now I'm on some meds. I've lost my train of thought. Don't introduce them all the same way. Like, yes. We don't always need to know eye color and hair color in order to meet a character. And in fact, if every single character is introduced with their hair color and eye color, it's a little weird because when you really meet people in real life, you don't go, "Oh, Max has blue eyes and brown hair. You know, you're like, oh, okay, he's like really tall." Or, "Hi, hang on, I'm live." Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so vary it, try to mix it up a bit.
Yes. And to add to that, don't always introduce them with their occupation.
Oh, that too, yeah.
Especially if you are in some kind of situation like education or military or something where people have ranks and levels that people outside of that occupation aren't really going to understand. And so if I'm like, "This is Dawn, she is a teacher, and then this is Nancy, she is the dean of the science department, and then this is Sam, who is the assistant principal," but this is, if you're not in that world, those don't all make sense to you all the time. So that's not always a good like descriptor to separate them from anybody else. I'm not going to remember that Sam was the associate principal unless it comes up really important later.
But if one character is acting deferential to another and it's slipped in that this is my boss, then everybody will remember that.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
All right. So whose POV is it anyway, Dawn?
So POV is my thing. That's why I'm trying to put together a class on deep POV that we're going to offer through Evident Ink very soon. I'm excited about that.
I am too.
So I know that new authors sometimes have trouble with head hopping, which is we start off in Penny's POV, and then in the middle of the sentence, we're in Cooper's POV, and then we're back to Penny's POV, and it goes back and forth that kind of way. Normally, you learn pretty quick not to do that. And there are some really, really big name authors who do that and get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
But until your name is that big, you don't get to do it and get away with it. It's confusing.
Yeah. So, even when they do it, it can be confusing, I think.
Yes. So generally you're allowed one POV switch per scene, basically. And it needs to be a clear delineated switch. Like you should know, I should have no question that I am suddenly in somebody else's head at that point.
And then to piggyback on that, well, you can make it clear by putting the character name at the beginning of a chapter or at the beginning of a scene if you want to really make it clear. And there's no reason not to make clear because you want to help your readers out. But to add to that, my brain has completely stopped working again. Please continue.
Okay, I will continue. To add to that, your characters' dialogue, thoughts, anything about them is going to be filtered through their experiences, their age, their gender. Men talk different than women do. A 20-year-old is going to think different than a 40-year-old. And that should be showing up enough so that, yes, please put the name on there so we know who we're we're in. But even if I put the book down and go and make dinner and come back and pick the book back up in the middle of a scene, I should still be able to know whose POV I'm in, because it's going to differ from the other characters.
That is what I was going to say. Yeah. Have a reason to be in different POV.
Yes.
By showing something internal to the character, their perspective on the world, their view of what's going on. If I can read their POV and get confused and think it's the other character's POV, then you might as well just have a distant third person narrator, because I'm not getting anything meaty from inside that character, right?
Well, and that goes with the other thing I was going to point out, that most newbie authors get over the head hopping really quick. Mm-hmm. Where they do still get caught, and even some veteran authors get caught, is with the sneaky POV shifts.
Yeah.
We're in deep POV, we're in this person's mind, and then all of a sudden it says they walked down the street admiring all of the roses in each yard. Okay, well, where did this person come from? Whose brain are we in? And it reminds me of like a TV show where it has a narrator pop up in the corner.
Yeah.
And they say something. So sometimes that works. Sometimes there's some genres where the distant third is expected. And sometimes in mysteries and thrillers, you've got a little bit where it's pulled back a little bit, and that works. But most of the time in romance, especially, you're expected to be pretty much in deep POV. And then those are the things that pull the readers out. And then it can be very sneaky, because even if you're in first person and you say something like, we walked down the street both thinking about whatever. Well, I don't know what he's thinking about. Right. He could be thinking about King Kong fighting airplanes. I have no idea. Or things like every head in the room turned, or every jaw at the table dropped. Okay, well, unless your POV character looked at every individual person, that's a sneaky POV shift.
See, and I definitely fall prey to that. And every now and then I feel like that's okay. Like, because that's sort of
definitely can work.
Well, and that's what's the word? That's an idiom. Every jaw in the room dropped, or every head turned. And so maybe not every head, but you know what I mean. Like,
right. Yes. Yes. So there's some places that can work. It's just when you see it layered on top of other issues, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah. All right. Record scratch, the sound of pacing and tension dying.
Yes. This is very...
Sorry. My brain is functioning and I can tell you what this is. So this is when you've got a scene or a book that's just galloping ahead. Everything is happening. Like if it's a romance, for instance, the two characters have, they've been on the date. Now they're stumbling out of the taxi cab together and fumbling for the car keys as they're kissing at the front door, and they've got the door open and he says, my mother had a house like this. And she says, oh, tell me about it. And then he says, it was a Victorian. Come inside. Are these hardwoods? Are they authentic? And then all of a sudden they're talking about the house, and the reader's like, wait, what?
Yeah. They were like, this is not where I saw that going.
Yeah, that's the sound of pacing dying. So when you've got everything pumping along, that's not a great place to build in a deep conversation about your mom or about really anything beyond what's happening in that moment.
Right.
Later, when all the tension has mounted and then dissipated and they're laying in each other's arms, he might look up at the wood beam crossing the ceiling and start talking about craftsman cottages, but not before, not during.
Which is what every girl wants to hear afterwards, right?
I've been house shopping. Sorry, this is what's on my mind.
Those are some amazing exposed beams up there. Yes, the character has to have a reason for any extra thoughts that they're having that are not about the immediate moment. And it also has to fit the situation, because yes, the guy coming in from the date, ready to throw down with the girl on the hardwood floor right there, may have the thought of, oh, my mom had hardwood floors. And then that is it. That is all that thought gets to have, because he has a completely different agenda at that moment.
Hopefully.
So So they have to have a motivation for why these things jump into their head. And the same thing goes for even if you have a quiet scene where somebody's reflecting on something, there needs to be a reason for them to reflect on it.
Yeah.
There needs to be, because in general, if I go into my kitchen and I don't know, I have some of my mother's dishes. We use them all the time, like every day. So every day when I pull them out, I do not think, oh, these were my mother's dishes, and have some kind of flashback to my mom. Generally, I'm thinking, looking at my child going, if you don't get this on the table in the next 5 minutes, you're just going to be eating off of whatever I throw down, you know?
Yeah.
And so there needs to be a reason why the flashback, especially if you're going into like a deep flashback, what has triggered it and why is it moving your story forward? What is it telling us about the character? And do we need to know it right then?
Yeah. One of the things that I have found useful, and I'm getting better at not adding in random stupid details. I think pacing is something that as I've built my author career, I have learned. It's part of the craft that has developed over time. And it's like anything else, practice makes not perfect, but better. And one thing that I have been able to do that I think is helpful is look at every scene if you want, or every paragraph, even if you're more detail oriented than I am, and write in the margin, like, why is this here? What purpose is this scene serving in my plot? How is this thought, this action moving this story forward? And if there's not an answer, or if you are really stretching to figure out how this exact scene is getting you to that eventual end, then you probably don't need it at all.
Absolutely.
So when you're looking at, like, I have 300 million words and maybe they're saying I should cut some. Those are the scenes that you really, who said kill your darlings? Was that?
I think that's Stephen King.
Was it Stephen King? Maybe.
I don't know. I think so.
This is not a day for me to be quoting, but yeah. And it's hard because you wrote those words and they seem important, and it's really hard as the author to differentiate what is critical and what's not. So, but do your best, slice and dice.
Yes. Yes. And you can always put it back in. You don't have to completely delete it. Just set it off to the side and see if anybody misses it when they read the story. Like, send it off to a beta reader and see if anybody misses it.
Yes.
All right. We ready to move on?
I think so. Here we go. Contrived conflict.
Yes. My title for this was Why I Want to Smack Them in the Head and Tell Them to Act Like Adults.
The characters or the author?
The characters.
Oh, okay.
I never want to smack my authors in the head. That is no, the characters.
Signs don't come back if you hit them.
I know. I won't do that. I promise.
Bad business practice.
And all of my authors will attest. I have never physically harmed any of them. Your conflict cannot be something that can be solved by a conversation. And if it is, there needs to be a really strong, compelling reason why these two grown-ups are not sitting down and having that conversation. Especially things that are built on misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And again, this is one of those things, it can be done very well as long as the misunderstanding is authentic enough that you believe these people don't even know they need to have the conversation.
Yeah. There has to be some other layer to a misunderstanding where they don't know that they have a misunderstanding.
Right. But if I'm sitting there going, oh my God, just call her.
Yeah.
Just pick up the phone or text her or, send a carrier pigeon, whatever, and say, hey, this is what you heard me say. This is what I meant. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
That should not be enough to solve your conflict if you want me to hang out with you for 300 pages.
Right. And that's the thing that when I first started, my agent would always come back to me. Everything I gave her, she'd be like, okay, let's work on the conflict. I'd be like, but no, there's conflict. I think I don't like conflict, like just in general. And it's really hard if you're a conflict averse person, especially, to put your characters uncomfortable.
Yes.
But even for me, just even ideating, like, what are conflicts? What are things that would keep people apart? Sometimes it was complicated and hard. But that's one of the cool things about chatting with you when I'm stuck. Because no one's good at conflict.
Conflict is another. I taught high school for a really long time. I can totally handle conflict. Conflict is one of those things. Another thing I'm hoping we can eventually develop a class on, because I think a lot of people think conflict is just arguing and disagreeing and that the characters don't see eye to eye. And generally that's not it at all. Usually the conflict is an impossible decision of you're having to choose between the two worst scenarios.
Yeah.
And something, you're going to risk something, you're going to gain something, and you're trying to weigh which is which, or you're risking everything or losing everything. Those are the best conflicts.
I think that's what always confused me when I started, because I started with romance, and all of the plotting books and conflict books that you can find are talking about thrillers and, action, and they're all talking about life and death. And it's very rare to find a romance where the stakes are life and death, So, and then they'd be like, well, it's an emotional death. But it's still very hard to conceptualize that when you're starting out and figure out how to build a realistic story that has a good conflict that feels like the stakes are that high. Because nobody's going to die if they don't get together.
Exactly. And there needs to be, and I know people get into the external conflict and the internal conflict. Both of those need to be very strong and be very believable. But generally the conflicts in romance are they're more the ones that can be solved with the conversation of, for example, if you take an enemies to lovers thing and the person is, oh, well, I hated him because he won the spelling bee when we were in 7th grade and I lost. Okay, well, how did that impact the rest of your life?
Right. The most believable
problem now.
Yes, because the most believable conflicts come from the wound or the misbelief that the character holds that about something. And it was either something that they learned as a child that was wrong, or that they perceived about the world as they grew that isn't quite right, that has led them to behave a certain way, believe a certain thing, and act a certain way in this relationship that is keeping them from being with the person.
Right.
And that's their transformation, right? They have to get over this misbelief or the wound.
Well, and there's a book, it is not one of our clients, but I cannot think of the name of it right now, that was about a woman who was going into prison to do a literacy. She was not going to prison. She was going into a prison to teach at a literacy program. Mm-hmm. And she ends up falling in love with one of the inmates that she's teaching to read. Well, her whole family is law enforcement. Mm-hmm. There's some conflict for you.
Yeah.
This guy's a felon, and he admits that he did. I can't remember what he did, but he admits that he did whatever he did. It's not a case of, oh, I shouldn't be in here. Right. But he's a felon. Her whole family's law enforcement. They're having this very clandestine affair that if they get caught, she's going to lose her job. He's going to, get punished more. I don't know. And so those are the kinds of things. That's the kind of life or death type thing of, and towards the end, he gets released. And so then you have the conversation of, you have the impossible decision. Do I stay with the man I love that my family is never going to accept?
Right.
Or do I leave the man I love and go with my family? And
there's a really good one. I don't know if anyone else has been watching Upload. Somebody suggested it to me. It's on Netflix. No, it's not. It's on Amazon Prime. And I think only the first season is out. I started watching it because it has Robbie Amell, who I'll watch anything that he's in. But it's just so smart. It's so clever. And the conflict, there's a romantic relationship involved, and it's an awesome conflict. Highly recommend. I won't give it away. All right, let's move on, shall we?
Okay. I like this one.
Here, have some sex. So this is specific to romance, although it probably...
Not necessarily. I've seen it in mysteries and thrillers too.
Yeah. So like any scene, I mean, we kind of already talked about how you could go through and categorize whether your scenes actually belong in your book. Because we do edit a lot of romance, I'll sometimes come across a sex scene that just sort of happens and it doesn't drive the plot forward. it doesn't really serve to build a relationship between the characters. It doesn't reveal anything about anyone's, fears, worries, hopes, dreams, connections. It's just there because it's a sex scene and it's a romance. And so it seemed like there should be some sex. And those ones shouldn't be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, if you're going to put in a sex scene, it should serve the plot in the same way that any other scene does. So it needs to reveal something about your characters or about their connection to one another or the world, or move your story forward somehow. So don't have sex for sex's sake unless you're writing erotica. Then sex is the plot. So go for it.
Yes, outside of erotica, sex always changes something. Every sex scene needs to change something. Like you said, it's going to change something about your character. It's going to change something about the plot. There's a reason, not a reason why they're having sex, but there's a reason why that sex scene is being included. And it needs to be there to propel things forward.
Yeah, not just because, I think I should have 4 sex scenes in a 70,000 word romance.
Right.
You don't need 4.
There's no number there's no magic number to how many sex scenes go in a romance. There's no magic number to how many sex scenes go in any book, really. And I know we mentioned this during the cliches, but I feel like I need to reiterate it here. If you are writing a thriller, they aren't stopping to have sex while they're running for their lives.
Probably not. Yeah.
Probably not. They need a safe place where they're reasonably protected, then they can have some sex. But
good point. All right. Nodding is not an emotion.
Nodding, swallowing, jaw dropping, fist clenching, eyebrows raising, those are not emotions.
Gasping. No. What about gasping?
Yeah. And panting. There are very, very few situations where your character should be panting. I'm just going to throw that out there.
I think when the last time I panted was.
I kind of feel the same about gasping, but the panting one is one that I've seen a lot lately that I'm like, unless she just ran 5 miles or spent an hour doing something else, panting should not be going on right now.
Yeah.
The problem with these, for example, swallowing, raising your eyebrows, those are not things we're generally aware of. I mean, you generally are not aware, unless you're doing it on purpose. Unless, like, for example, I mentioned that I taught high school for a long time. I absolutely have a teacher face that I'm very aware of when I'm doing my teacher face. So if I'm stopping to think that I'm going to look like this.
Is that your teacher face?
That's my teacher face. That's my.
It's kind of like I know I'm doing something wrong and you're waiting for me to figure it out.
Right. Yes. So
I like it.
That was the whole point.
Okay.
I taught high school for 18 years. That was a face that came in handy. But on a general, like, moment-to-moment basis, I have no idea what my eyebrows are doing.
Yeah.
And so if you're using my eyebrows shot up, or I, quirked an eyebrow, which I can't do. Maybe that's why I don't like seeing it in books, is because I can't. Yeah, see, I can't do that. I have to raise both of them. That was kind of psycho. I need to stop that.
I can only do one. Anyway, I shouldn't do that.
So, yes, there's times when you think about it and you are purposely doing that to make a face at somebody. But 90% of the time, you're not aware of your own eyebrows. Same thing for swallowing. If you are being intimidated and it says, I swallowed, there needs to be something after that. There needs to be a thought that expresses the fear that you're having, or if you're so attracted to this person, your throat's gone dry, then there needs to be a thought. And so generally what's missing with those kind of those kinds of emotions that don't show emotion is that there needs to be a next step with them. Now, you can, if somebody's like saying, yes, I nodded. Okay, yes, that's okay. But normally there needs to be something else with it to expand what the character is thinking or feeling in that moment.
Right. Because the reader could draw any conclusion from swallowing.
Yes.
I mean, just so something scary is happening, I swallowed. I could be swallowing because I'm about to scream. I could be swallowing because I'm about to launch myself at my attacker, or I'm about to turn tail and run. But you don't know what I'm about to do unless you can see what's going on around the swallowing. So that's that deep POV thing.
Well, and I want to point out too, adding my eyebrows shot up in shock. That doesn't help. No. You need to say my eyebrows shot up, which again, you're not thinking about your eyebrows, so don't make your eyebrows shoot up. I'm just going to say that right now. Okay. But you need to, if you have to have your eyebrows shoot up, then my eyebrows shot up. I can't believe Tony's the father of Tina's baby. Right. You know, there needs to be the next step.
Yeah. All right. Sort of similar. Characters clearing their thoughts by shaking their head like an Etch-a-Sketch.
Yes. Your brain is not an Etch-a-Sketch. The thoughts don't go away just because you do this. That is something I have seen a lot recently that I don't know. I feel like maybe some big name author used it somewhere to say, you know, I shake my head to clear that thought. And then like 800 other authors latched onto it.
Huh.
Because I don't remember seeing it before, but it has come up a lot recently. And generally, now you can say, I give myself a mental shake. That is better, I guess. Yeah. But very rarely when you're thinking something, do you do like this? And the thought goes away.
To move on to the next thought. Like, okay, yeah. Ready for the next one.
You remember those little viewfinder things where you click through the pictures, you know?
Yeah.
Click, no. And so that goes with the swallowing and the raising of the eyebrows. That's another thing, shaking your head, squeezing your eyes shut. Now, yes, I know that some people do squeeze their eyes shut to parse out a thought. Where the squeezing your eyes shut catches me is if they're talking to another character. Same thing if they're shaking their head when they're talking to another character. That character is going to respond to the fact you're standing there randomly with your eyes closed now, and I don't know why.
Right.
And so, and the other one that goes with that is shuddering.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, yeah, you shudder and you shiver, and in certain scenes, shivering is very good and it works. But if you have a character who's constantly shuddering at the thought, they're not physically moving, or I hope not, because that's going to get exhausting.
Right. Well, these are physical embodiments of emotions, right? That we want our readers to understand our characters are feeling. So in order to make sure that the reader is getting what you want them to get, you have to add to that. They can shudder or they could shake their head, I guess, but we need to understand why. And I think the best way for writers to be able to communicate those types of conversations realistically is to put themselves in that conversation. You know, usually when you're writing, you feel like one of the characters or the other, or at least you relate more to one or another. Mm-hmm. So take a step back and put yourself in that conversation. How are you reacting when he says this thing to you? You probably don't just stand there and shake your head. You feel something. Maybe your chest tightens, or, you know, your tongue feels thick in your mouth because you're surprised that he would say this to you. How dare he say this to you after all those times that you did that? And, you know, there's something going on up here in addition to whatever is happening on your face or with your body. So just make sure it all comes together to be realistic.
Yes. Yeah? Yes.
What else? Oh, I didn't put this one in yet. Hold on.
Oh, okay.
John loves this one.
This one's my favorite.
All right. I am guilty of using this.
Okay. I couldn't help but. Yes, you can. You have control. I know
Dawn counts when I send her something now. She'll start marking every time I couldn't help but think how blah, 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 blah. She'll put 1 and then the next one, 2. And I'll get to like
I do
7, 10.
Yeah, it's very much, I usually 2, maybe 3 in very specific circumstances. But after the third one, I'm like, oh, I'm done. Mm-mm. Because, okay, one caveat to this. If you were using it for dialogue, that is a phrase people say.
Yeah.
And so if they say something like, well, I couldn't help but laugh when he fell down. I shouldn't have, but I did. Okay, that makes sense.
That's a freebie. She won't count that one.
Yeah, the dialogue I'll give you. But your character has agency. Your character is making decisions, and your character has control over those decisions. And so if you have a male character who says something like, I couldn't help but watch the back of her skirt as she walked away. Okay, yes, you could, and own it. Be like,
not to.
Yes. Be like, I wanted to watch the back of her skirt, or I did watch the back of her skirt, or I watched the back of her skirt, and then, my kid caught me watching and I had to deal with that.
Right.
So I couldn't help, but there's very few things the character can't help. And that is a phrase that's goes into what we're going to talk about next. But this is a filter phrase. This reminds the reader that they're being told a story. Because generally in our minds, when we do something, we don't think, well, I can't help but be angry about this.
Right. It's a narration. Like,
yes.
Clearly I am narrating what I am thinking about. So
right.
it pulls you out of the story. Is this just a Nancy Delancey thing, or do other people use this?
No. And plenty of my clients, I'm like, yes, they can. They can't help it. I promise you. But it's like you said, it's a narration, and it's something that comes up in dialogue. It's something people say naturally. So when you get into storytelling mode, like if I was telling you a story about something that happened and I was like, well, I couldn't help but look, I mean, he came running by in just a t-shirt, then that's a phrase that comes out. And that's why it shows up as narration, is because it's not a natural thought for the character at that point.
That makes sense. All right. I think, is this number 10? I think
this is number 10. Oh, I guess we should have numbered them. I'll number them when I create the little checklist for you.
Okay. You might have to put more explanation than just the little titles too.
Okay.
All right. Number 10. That's a fine filter you've got there. So this kind of relates to what Dawn just said about I couldn't help but. Anything that reminds your reader that you are telling them a story pulls them out of the story, and it's called a filter. So there's a lot of different kinds of filter words. One that used to get flagged when I was doing trad publishing, when I'd turn things in, was the word feel. Mm-hmm. If you're using the word feel, odds are good you're not showing the word, what the feeling is. You're telling your reader what your character feels instead of showing them the feeling, which I think is a pretty common struggle. I felt so sad, but there's a lot of other ways to explain that your character is feeling sad without saying she feels sad, right? Her heart clenches inside her chest. She, withers under his gaze, or I don't know.
And you risk your characters being too self-aware, because generally you don't think to yourself, I feel sad.
Right.
In the moment, you might think, or I feel very angry right now. I just screamed at everybody and broke a plate. Huh. Maybe I'm grumpy.
Yeah.
So the other thing that goes with this is a lot of times they will, it'll be mentioned that any of your senses should not be named. So if you're in really deep POV, you don't say things like, I heard the footsteps running down the hall. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I don't fully agree with that, because sometimes that works perfect.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to eliminate every time you've got the word I heard or I felt, but generally if you say something like, I looked outside and saw a man walking towards my door, you can usually just say, I looked outside, a man was headed towards my door, and you can eliminate the saw. And it, like you said, keeps the reader into the story rather than reminding them they're being told a story.
Right. Or better yet, someone knocks at the door and a glance out the window reveals a man I don't know. Then you're in the character in the moment. I was talking with someone else about this recently, and she mentioned that she was reading a Sierra Simone book. And I was like, you know what? She's really good at she doesn't use the filter words. She's very deep POV. So if you're looking for an example, a lot of Sierra Simone's work works that way. She's super, I call her literary erotica. Very poetic, excellent writer. But really a good example of getting you like inside the character without using a lot of those filter words.
Yes. And another part that goes with this on the filter words is phrases like, it was in that moment that
Right.
or it was then that she knew.
Because those are narrations too, right?
Right.
They're back to like, hey, oh, by the way, I'm still telling you this story.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's also things like, I just now my brain just left because somebody walked through my office. Oh, it was my turn. Like if you're having banter back and forth between two characters and one of the characters teases the other one, and then it's like, well, it was my turn to tease him. Again, that reminds the reader, you're not in this moment. You're not experiencing this moment with me. I'm telling you about it later.
Right. Yeah, and those are hard because sometimes you don't recognize them, even when you're looking for them. So, oh, you know what? We haven't been looking at comments at all, Dawn.
Oh no.
There are a couple. One's from much earlier when James said, "Consider it a blind date" is a great way to put it. I think that was the very first thing we were talking about. And then Laura Herrera said, "Character overload." And since we were not paying attention, Laura, I'm sorry, I'm not exactly sure where that goes.
With our character soup conversation about who are these people and why do we care?
That makes sense. Yes. And sorry, I think it's Laura, not Laura.
Oh,
I am not with it today, guys. Sorry.
And I'm just blaming everything on her. So
that's fair. That's how my family does it.
So those are our top 10. Those are the 10 that we came up with.
And we'll make a little checklist just because it is, I don't think, a bad plan to, while some people do shoot off their manuscript the second they finish the first draft, I think it's a great idea to read it again, and especially with a tool like a worksheet or a checklist to kind of remind you the things that you're looking for that you can filter out on your own to make it easier and get more value out of the edit that you're going to pay for eventually when you do send it to an editor. So,
well, and that leads directly into what we have coming up next week,
which is self-editing. Yeah. Tips for self-editing.
Yes. We're going to have some very actionable, concrete steps. This is what you should do before you send this off to an editor.
Yeah. So I wonder, well, we'll make a checklist of the 10 that we just talked about, but they'll probably be on the checklist for next week too. I think supplying a tool for self-editing would be a good plan.
Yes.
So we'll get right on that.
We will do that.
And then I think we're taking a week off so I can drive across the country or somehow get across the country because right now I can't drive.
Yes. Well, and we're hoping you're going to feel better next week.
Oh my God, I hope so. If any of you out there is an orthopedic surgeon who knows about neck stuff, just feel free to chime in. Yes. And then what else do we want to remind you of? Online classes are coming. There is one up now. It is still on sale. The Elements of Romance is up there. I think it's $14 until the end of May. There is a pinned post on the Evident Ink Facebook page if you click through that, you'll get the discount. So look for that if you're interested. And it has some of the stuff we were talking about today. And hopefully pretty soon, early in June, we'll have a deep POV course.
We are aiming for the beginning of June. I keep saying June 1st, but honestly, we're taking that week off because you are moving across the country and my daughter is graduating and turning 18 in the same week.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to hope that comes out. June, it will happen in June.
Let's just say June. June's good. Yeah.
And we'll have more details about that very soon.
Good. Okay. Well, I think that's it for us today. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. It's nice to see you in the comments. Please always feel free to ask questions. Oh, and we should mention that after our week off, we are going to have a question answering, sort of throw all your questions at us. We'll put a post up. I should have done that already and totally didn't think about it. So anything you'd like to ask, you can throw into that post, or you can email us or PM us, and we'll sort of compile all of those into a show answering the burning questions.
Yes. Please send us questions, please.
If you don't, we'll just talk. It's okay.
Yeah, otherwise we're just going to make stuff up. So
I'm good at that. I'm a writer.
that is why we're here.
All right. Well, we will see you guys next week for self-editing. All right. Have a good night.
Bye.
And